India has a long tradition of making fine silver objects, be it jewellery or symbolic pieces used for ceremonies and worship. The Amrapali Museum in Jaipur, that houses some exquisite silver pieces from across India, has brought out a book, The Adornment of Gods, showcasing some of their outstanding pieces. What makes this book a standout are the selection of objects and the commentary on the idea behind it, by author and mythologist Devdutt Patannaik.
I have always asked myself, how do the images that we take for granted today reached houses, say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, before there was internet, before there was print technology, before there was television? How did we see our gods? How did we imagine how they look? We take it for granted now, because of the print technology, and it's very easily accessible. But 200 years ago, 300 years ago, these objects, and there would be murals, there would be these village art through which the gods would enter your homes. And, I was very interested in that. So when I saw the collection, that's what happens to me. I wouldn't look at the pot. I would look at the artifact around it and why is it, the object didn't interest me as much as the stories that were painted on it or carved on it in this case. And then, of course, the object does play some role, but for me, these motifs become important. And what I decided when I was talking to Pramod, we spent a lot of time looking at the artwork. They sent me the whole collection. And I said, how do you want to string it together? And we figured out, the way to do it is through an evolutionary idea. Because what we don't realize is that Indian mythology has a very strong connection with evolution. So the elements, then the plants and the animals, then the humans, then the gods, then our relationship with the world. Are we engaging with the world? Are we withdrawing from the world? So all that, is part of Hindu traditions, Jain traditions, Buddhist traditions. And I wanted to present the story in that way.
In this LHI special, Devdutt is joined by curator of the Amrapali Jewels Museum in Jaipur, Pramod Kumar, as they take us through a selection of 11 pieces with fascinating stories. These objects capture the essence of this collection of the Adornment of the Gods.
So my first object is the processional scepter, and the lion-headed scepter is essentially used in both royal processions and also in religious ceremonies. The reason we wanted it for the book, and especially, the image was too powerful for it not to be on the cover, is that here you have an extraordinary object that is etched, which is carved, which has got several hammering techniques that have gone into creating the form, but it is essentially used in processions where you are trying to say that this is somebody of importance who is coming behind you. So we've realized that sculptures were essentially used by putting in the head of either an elephant or of in this case a lion head. There were some sculptures which also have tiger heads, and sometimes even snake images were imagined. So these were sort of heraldic objects that allowed you to look at what came behind you, and they were meant to proclaim the greatness of what was behind. So it could either be proclaiming the greatness of the emperor, the king in whose possession this was going, or it would mean the greatness or the supremacy of the god in whose possession this was. You'll be interested to know that even in South India and several temples, when the idols are taken out in procession within the temple precinct, similar sculptures are taken in front of the god, just to herald that something really supernatural, something really important is going to come after us. So for us, the image was a no-brainer. It was really important, and so in a way it is also telling you that the book is really heralding a new path for people to look at objects and gods associated with it by design, by motif. So the history of the object is that as far as we know, it is from Western India. So it is either made in Gujarat or Rajasthan. It is from about the late 19th century. This we say with some amount of certainty because published references of almost identical objects exist from the late 19th century. So this I would date it around 1870s to 1880s. And we also say Western India because similar objects were used in processions for Jain monks and their sacred books, and religious processions of the Jain communities very often had these objects going. So we can't tell you for 100% sure that this came from XYZ collection or shrine or person, but we definitely know that it was used in processions in Western India.
So scepters are basically symbols of power. So that's the reason it is the first thing that is seen before you see the deity. There'll be this one man carrying it. It's I don't know. I mean, Pramod can clarify whether these would be called dandas, or because dandapani is the bearer of the staff, and danda means it means authority, and at very fundamental level, only the king has the authority to use violence. Like, the state has the authority to use violence, and therefore danda niti means the king's authority to use violence, and therefore danda could be the scepter. I'm not 100% sure whether it means the same thing, but the lion, the elephant, and the serpent are three very powerful motifs that are used in India repeatedly to show authority. Lion or tiger. You see, the funny thing is, we are not very sure whether lions were native to India. That's a very big, people keep talking about it. But lions around the world have been symbols of power. China had no lions, but lion is a symbol of power in China. Singapore is a city named after a lion. There were never any lions in Singapore. Sinhala, the city, the island of the lions, which is Sri Lanka, never had lions. So the symbol of the lion is far more important than the real lion. And perhaps it was influenced by the Egyptians. So from Egyptians to the Persians, from the Persians to India, from India to China and Southeast Asia, this image of the lion, I think because of its mane, that's what makes it special. Lion becomes very powerful symbol of authority. But in India, I think because most artists had never seen a lion. They had only seen the art of a lion more than the real lion. Although we imagine that lions were there when you see the Durga Pandal statues. But if you look at them carefully, even if you look at this lion, the way it's designed, the design is where, and in fact, if you just study the lions across India, the design is just spectacular, the way they imagine the animal. They're not trying in India. One of the things is they never bother to make it very realistic or naturalistic. It's always stylized. And this, you look at the eyes. I mean, the eyes are unusually strong and powerful. And you see the jaw and the tongue sticking out in a way. I don't think it's natural. It's almost as if he's, sticking out his tongue at the audience. These are things that struck me when you see this image. It's really a powerful image when you see that. I think that's why it made it to cover. I guess the lion needs its first place all the time.
Second object that we're going to talk about is the remarkable portable shrine. It's a gold shrine. For us, it was really important because this is one of the few instances of a shrine that has come down to us, in this case from the 18th century, from South India, which is fairly intact. We have several elements that go into the shrine that come together. In most other examples within the collection and elsewhere in the world, they're disparate pieces. They're not necessarily connected together. So the grandness, the elaborate way in which it was done, and also the quality of it being portable. Devotee could carry it with him or herself wherever she went. I suspect, being a golden object of this scale, even though it's minute, the way it's etched, carved, and engraved upon, and of course the precious material that has been used, I suspect it was for a royal patron or somebody fairly important. And the lightness of being is literally what comes through in this. You also see the fragile element of 300-400 years of history, with one of the legs slightly crooked. It's gone wonky by constant usage. But fairly, it's really important for a shrine of this nature to come together. And that's the reason we thought, let's try and explain what is this concept of a portable shrine, of carrying the gods with you. And we wanted a sort of idea for what really this meant, and hence this object. The central object in the portable shrine, which here you see is only as a gold encasing, would have held a shaligram, or it would have held a shivalinga, or it would have held a rudraksha of a certain quality, to convey the idea that this is an object of worship for the Shaivites. And my feeling is that it is a Shaivite worship object.
So, one of the reasons that this becomes exciting when you watch it is, one, the idea that gods can travel with you. So there is one god which is kept in the house, which is always there and never leaves the house. But when you are traveling, gods travel with you. And when they travel, they have to come with their paraphernalia, everything with it. But this is what is called an asana, or a seat. And if you look carefully at an asana, there is the place where he sits. So that is the earth. On top, there is the umbrella, which is the sky. Then there are the flags, which represents the atmosphere between the earth and the sky. and therefore the air, the wind, everything is sort of visualized in this image. So the earth has been recreated in this one little thing. So you have the earth below, the sky above, and in between the atmosphere, the antariksha, which between the two, and the deity is situated, and behind the deity is the guardian serpent, the Vasuki, standing there. And this could be, yes, we know that this is probably a Hindu shrine, but this could be a Buddhist shrine at some time, because the snake is common to Buddhism. It could be a Parshanath shrine for the Jains. This is where the gods would sit. So this is across the religions which emerged in India. The original objects that people worshipped before there were icons were aniconic stones from river beds. So the Gandak river would give us the Shaligram, which is an ammonite fossil. The Narmada river would give us the stones that are used for showing Shiva. The Rudraksha is a seed of a fruit. The Rudraksh is a part of a tree. So, these are the aniconic forms that would have been used, say, thousands of years ago, before iconography became big, before metals came into the picture. And so you see this continuity of traditionally. Now it is placed in a box, and someone can afford to put that box on a jeweled throne and put this beautiful parasol on top of it. I keep telling people that in the Jain traditions, the divine, the Tirthankara is a ascetic, but he's always visualized using royal symbols. So the parasol, this is not a Jain shrine, most probably because the Jain shrine would have the umbrella would have three parts. It's called a triple umbrella, the triple parasol. This is a single parasol, so it's definitely not a Jain shrine. This is how you figure out which probably religions are using this. And the fact that there are the flags over there, the patakas, are also again royal symbols. This is what the queens would dream when they would give birth to sages and kings. So all that comes across in this one image. You can see the Kirti Mukha on top, the lion face right on top, said to be watching you. So it says it stands at a height, so he can see what you are trying to hide from the gods and ready to kill you if you are lying. So that's the Kirti Mukha out there, the face of glory. Then on the sides, you can see the lion with the snake-like thing coming out. It's a yali. It is really a combination of the lion and the elephant. Then of course you have these makara-like creatures, bird-like creatures with elephant heads on the side. So there is kind of a chimerical, they are the mixture of many animals. But while in Greek mythology such mixtures were seen as obscene and evil, in India, they were seen as signs of fertility, where the bird merges with the elephant, merges with the lion. And that kind of imagery in India is always considered to be auspicious. So you have Kirti Mukha over here, you have the Yali, you have the Makara. So it's quite a rich image, really. The patakas over there. There are plants, pearls, rubies. So it's quite a fabulous piece if you think about it.
In this case, we should be clear that the rubies, the uncut rubies that are being seen here, are actually cabochons of a certain kind where they are not being faceted. Remember that in India, the size was of premium. We didn't really want to cut it down to give us the most reflective quality, be it for diamonds, be it for rubies, be it for any other stones. So we always constantly try to maximize and keep it. Finding a loop of graded stones which were similar in size and tone and color was also a deliberate choice. Of course, then you had to wait longer to be able to get these pieces together. And the way in which they were stacked, the way in which they're arranged, very heavily fish scale like patterns exist, linear patterns exist. In this case, of course, there are 2-3 different registers of rubies, and the uppermost register is the smallest rubies, and then so consequently each register, as you go lower and lower, the stones become bigger. If you see the single pearl in the middle of the uppermost register, it's also interesting. Very well, it's possible that the original ruby fell off and it was replaced by a pearl. That was also common. We were always ingenious enough to convert a negative into a positive when things like that happen. So South India, yes, for sure. We think it is South India from 18th century. The creation of the Prabhavalli, the aureole around the object, which radiates Prabha, which radiates light, is to give a special dimension to the object that is kept in front of it. So icons usually had this. In this case, the case which holds either the Shivalinga or the Shaligram or the Rudraksha is the icon that is being glorified by this Kirtimukha, the Chimera, as Devdutt spoke about, and as also the Prabhavalli that is there. The third object for us, the Narsingh, the trumpet, which is also known as Narsingh in the northern parts, largely Himachal Pradesh. Certain versions of this also exist in Leh Ladakh region. We see that there as well. For us, this was fascinating because while the object in its shape is fairly common, you see it in wood, you see it in other material, in copper very often. Silver ones were probably meant for a certain kind of shrine. But what really took our attention was the beautiful Hanuman carved on the wide open end of it from where the sound emits, and the shloka that has been engraved on it. The use of Hanuman was particularly good because he's known as Pavan Putra Hanuman, and when the sound is emitted, the wind blows out, and so literally the way of Hanuman coming out, bellowing out of it, was really remarkable. And we wanted to ask Devdutt as to, is this the kind of story that exists all over the country? Is Hanuman really looked at as the son of the wind god? But what is this iconography and the nuance that even the carver, the small worker doing this, was aware enough to add this ingenious detail into the object?
I think the story of Hanuman is known across India and Southeast Asia, and he is the god, the son of the wind god, so Pavan Putra. And it's also because the wind, or Maruta, is associated with Rudra. So this, the howler from the Vedic times becomes Marudra. So because the sound of the storm, or the sound, even now we have these books like Song of Storms. So the idea of a howling wind, the storm, was always seen as something auspicious, something powerful, something awe-inspiring. And the fact that this is called, if I'm not mistaken, it's called a Narsingha. So it's like, it's the roar of a lion, the roar of a sound, the king is coming. So it's like the trumpet coming, the wind, the storm, the power is evoked. And then I think by putting the Hanuman image, they are reinforcing that when Ram comes before him, his herald Hanuman comes, and Hanuman is himself so powerful because he carries the mountain in his hand, and that carrying the mountain in his hand and flying at the same time. So he's not just he's a Vanara, so he's a monkey god. He can fly through the air, so he's a Siddha Vanara. That means he has got these magical powers. He can fly through the air, fly over the sea, carries in his hand the mountain. And even to make it even more complex, they say that he actually holds the sun in his armpit so that the sun doesn't escape. So they're really trying to evoke power, right? They're trying to make someone very powerful. And if you're familiar with Indian iconography, you will find a lot of images where Ravana, who is the antagonist of the Ramayana, who is Ram's enemy, is trying to carry a mountain of Shiva, and he's crushed by Shiva under the mountain. So while you have Ravana who's crushed by a mountain, Ram's herald, Hanuman, carries a mountain through the sky, over the sea. That's clearly showing the competitive side of royalty and power. And Ram was a very important royal figure before he became a central character in the Bhakti movement. Even Hanuman is now seen from a Bhakti angle. But say 500 years ago, 600 years ago, before the Bhakti Ramayans emerged, Ram was a royal figure and Hanuman was his herald. So the fact that the herald is so strong makes the king even more stronger. And therefore, I think these images are symbols of power, authority, but mixed with auspiciousness.
So the fourth object that we are going to talk about is the silver case for a Nandi sculpture. This is very important for us because here all of a sudden you see that a temple is there, you have a shrine, and the Nandi was there in the shrine. But successive generations down the line, how do people participate in adding glory to the temple? And in that way, perhaps it's prophesizing a wish fulfillment. How do they become part of the shrine? So one way is, why don't I create a case for the Nandi? Why don't I create a silver case, which is, of course, a proclamation of my own greatness, that I have this money and I'm able to spend this much. So the way the community became part of the shrine over successive generations, over many iterations, was really fascinating for us. And the fact that this was probably clearly made for a particular shrine, for a sculpture whose size it fit, there is a slight deviation in the left to the right size of it, and we see a little gap that gives you a sense that the original carved stone would have had the right side slightly higher than the left side, and hence this gap when you see it being completed. But the details on it, the fact that you have a sort of a Gana kind of figure in front of it when you see the front view, it was quite remarkable, and hence we wanted to get a sense from Devdutt as to this adding layers of be in gold, be it in silver and other precious material, even of taking gold foil and putting it like the Buddhist shrines. Constantly you see Sri Lankan devotees adding a gold foil onto these stupas. What is it about embellishing and adding a layer that is so important in our religious spaces?
In a temple, the deity is considered to be alive. And what is one sign of being alive? It has to grow. So it grows with time. So you have a rock, and then the rock suddenly will sprout eyes, and then you will have hands made of it, and feet made of it, and lamps made out of it, and you'll suddenly have the temple emerging. So it's an organic structure. So when in India somebody says how do you date a temple? When somebody tells me Madurai Meenakshi, they'll say it's 400-year-old. But we all know it's not that simple, because the Gopuram would have been made 300 years ago. Another Gopuram would have been 400 years ago. Another Gopuram would be 500 years ago. The Sanctum Sanctorum would be 700 years old. Within that, there would be these carvings which would be 800 years old. There would be that rock which would have been perhaps 3,000 years old. So with time, the temple sort of organically emerges and transforms, and that shows it has wealth and power. And I think here the shiveling which would have been there is they have put this silver coil on it. The man standing in front of it is very, very unusual. I don't know whether it could be the one who has, the donor's image, because it's not seen it's not part of traditional iconography. So it's clearly somebody's asked that murti wahan bana do. So it's perhaps, it's like the Krishnadevaraya having his statue in Tirupati, which is a very unusual phenomenon. Normally, it's always kept anonymous, or you'll have these little footprints or their names written on the floor. So I think this is also perhaps the donor. I don't know. One is not sure about these things. But the thing about it is that this idea of adding things comes from that. So Nandi, obviously somebody would have given the head, if this, it's obviously Shiva shrine, so the Shivalinga would have a mukha, a mask. And there would be these grand masks that even now we see sometimes on all these social media. They show these masks because people are not happy with just a simple iconic rock. So you want a mask, and then you have got around the mask, you have got these many more masks, multiple masks on different days. So you have people offering these masks, and maybe somebody came up with the idea, why just give it to the Shiva? Let's also embellish the Nandi which is outside. And I think this image would have emerged maybe on special occasions, maybe on special days. This would have been added, and it's quite it's a zebu bull. I always keep telling, the hump is not seen in all bulls across the world. It's a uniquely Indian phenomena which you see from the Harappan times. What is interesting is I would really like to see the posterior part of it, because the scrotum is usually shown in a very exaggerated form in Nandi, and it's something which I find it very, I always remark on, and people keep wondering, why do you talk about it? It's because many Indians today think Nandi is a cow. And this is the state of our knowledge, where people think it's a cow. So first of all, gender is wrong, or they don't know the difference between a bull and an ox. And I have to tell all the farmers would have worshipped the bull, and the bull is very powerful symbol of power, virility, and independence. So it's very much a symbol of Shiva, because Shiva is virile and independent, cannot be tamed, cannot be used to pull a plow, cannot be used to pull a cart, and therefore the virility comes at a price. The virility comes at the price of being extremely ferocious, unpredictable, and that's what the Nandi represents, which is something that people forget, that if they actually see a bull, it's quite a scary animal. It's a very powerful, very impressive animal, which is the reason why it is part of the Shiva temple, because it evokes the emotion that Shiva is associated with: independence, power. And I think that this is what the bull is. Although here they're showing him almost docile, and with this man sitting over there, it's because in Shiva's presence he calms down. And it is the presence of the goddess which calms him down. Otherwise, he can be quite a difficult animal to handle.
So the fifth object we are looking at is a remarkable piece of embellishment in silver, it is a plaque, and we think it is possibly a souvenir plaque which you collected in a pilgrimage site, most probably in Maharashtra, looking at the pantheon of gods that are depicted there. The central figure is Shiva. We have Godavari and several other interesting representations. And our question to Devdutt was, why is Godavari, who's, we are used to people worship the Ganga, the Yamuna, but we don't really very often see the Godavari being represented. And that was the reason we wanted this particular. But the fact that what you and I today go to a shrine and pull out, go buy a souvenir of the memento, was a tradition that has existed from at least the 6th, 7th century onwards. We have examples of souvenirs from 8th, 9th century from the temple at Bodh Gaya. We have examples of other souvenirs which are carried. And this was a remarkable souvenir which we think is from about the mid-19th century. And we really wanted Devdutt's interpretation of what was this pantheon of gods trying to do.
So this is, in Marathi, it's called a tak. So tak is something that when you go to a pilgrim spot, you get a tak, and also tak could be medallions which families would inherit. So there are these Kula Devas, and we forget that many Indian, today we don't realize the large portions of Indian population would have been nomadic. And they would be nomadic. So not all are settled communities. And nomadic people carry their gods with them. And they are usually in the form of medallions. And now we have, of course, those terracotta images, which are very popular from Rajasthan. But the tak would be the same thing in a metal format. And this is, of course, more a tourist tak. It's more, obviously, again, I would say 100 years ago, if you go, in my house, my mother had these silver things which would have been collected from various shrines across Odisha. So you would go there and you would get a little silver piece, depending on how much you can afford, an aluminium piece, a silver piece, gold pieces. Now we have got those printed photographs that we can easily buy, and then even those were sometimes embellished with gold and silver at one particular time. But this is telling us about Godavari. Now this is, most of the Hindu gods really come from the Gangetic plains. So that is why we talk of Ayodhya and Mathura and Kailas. They're all Gangetic, they're all the Himalayas. That's where the source of Hindu tradition remains. I mean, we use the word India, but it's really the Gangetic plain from where the gods emerge. So Ramayana happens there, Mahabharata happens there, everything, the Himalayas, Shiva lives on the Himalayan mountains. But then the idea spreads after about 500 BCE, like Buddhism and Jainism, these ideas start to spread. And they spread first along the coast, on the eastern coast, and then along the Malwa plateau, it moves towards Gujarat, and then along the western coast. And the first river that you encounter really after Ganga, as you move southwards, after you pass the Malwa region and you pass the Vindhya regions, it's the Godavari river. So Godavari is called Dakshin Ganga, the southern Ganga. And the stories of how Ganga, the goddess Parvati gets angry with Ganga because she always sits on Shiva's head, and she uses various tricks to get her out and make her flow down south. So one of the story goes that she tells Ganesha to do something. Ganesha goes and meets the sage called Gautam Rishi and pretends to be a cow, and Gautam Rishi tries to push the cow away, and then Ganesh pretends to die. So the Gautam Rishi feels, I have done Gauhatya, I've killed a cow. What do? Let me get Ganga to flow in this region. And he prays to Shiva, and Shiva tells Ganga to flow south. And that is how Godavari is actually Ganga flowing in the south. So this story is told to make now Godavari an equivalent of Ganga. Similar stories are found about Kaveri, Krishna. All these rivers are considered to be Dakshin Ganga. So Ganga keeps going south. As the Brahmin movement kept moving southwards, Ganga kept coming southwards. The mountain started becoming called Dakshin Kailas. So that's how it moves. This is a migratory story which is happening. This is in the Trimbakeshwar area, so Nasik. Where is Nasik located? Just south of the Vindhyas, near the Godavari river. So that is a very central, the Satavahan belt. Between it, so it is where Paitan, Nashik, all these places where you have a lot of Buddhist shrines, and it's between this what is called the Cotton Highway, which connected Andhra Pradesh and the seaports of Mumbai. So this is a very important trade center at one time. Nasik is important to Buddhists, Jains, Hindus, and this is where Trimbakeshwar stands. One of the major Jyotirlinga stands at the central Mukhalinga that we see is of Trimbakeshwara. So the Trimbakeshwara is the three mothers coming together. It could mean the three eyes. There are many ways of reading it, but this is a Shiva shrine clearly, because Vishnu is taking a side position over there. You can see, if I start right from the top, you can see Vitthal over there. So there is Vitthal and Rakhumai with arms akimbo, and then you see so it's V is for Vithala, Rukmini is Rukumai, Go is I think Gorakshnath, so that's Gorakhnath over there. Na is, I'm not 100% sure, but it could be Nandi. So these are very strong Nathpanthi traditions, and therefore you see the deity is associated with serpents. Again, you have Ram over there on the side. Nashik is a very important place from where Sita is supposed to have been abducted. So that is where Panchavati is. So Hanuman, there is Ram over there. It's a very, as I said, Nathpanthi center. Then you have Shiva with his son Ganesha. On one side is Parvati, and normally it would have been Ganga, but here it is Godavari. So she has taken the place of Ganga. You have Lakshmi over there associated with Vishnu, but there's also Dattatreya. Dattatreya is again a Adinath. The Gorakhnath Nathpanthi tradition is about 1,000 years old and is one of those traditions which sort of says that it is the combination of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva, which is what Dattatreya represents. If you go on the lower line, you can see there you have Durga, then we have got, the Ganga Avatarana. So there you can see Shiva is just standing again in the arms akimbo trying to get Ganga. So it's talking about, if I had looked at the shrine and studied the shrine, I would say this is talking about a Tirtha Sthana. Water is associated, Shiva is associated, water is coming down. This water being so important because Ganga Avatarana is there, the rivers are being represented, Lakshmi is being represented. So it's a very rich, charged image. And of course, again you have Vishnu with his 4 hands, Chaturbhuj Vishnu is appearing on that side. And then of course Durga doing the, riding a lion, killing Mahishasura. So it's all the Hindu pantheon. This is the Puranic, all the gods coming together to create this Tak, which is quite impressive.
So the 6th object that we are looking at is the Rehal or the book stand, and this was of course used for the Holy Quran. The color green of the nephrite jade is very indicative of the community's preference for this color, especially for auspicious things. Of course, auspicious is not necessarily a word they would use for it. What is remarkable for us is, of course, the jewel maker's skill here. They have added liquid gold into the nephrite, where incisions were carved into the nephrite jade and gold was put in. Thus you see a trellis like a grid pattern. And while there are some 16th, 17th century examples that exist in world museums, in museums across the world, in India we see certain examples from the 18th and 19th century. Our assumption of this one is that it is from the late 18th, early 19th century. What's also unique here and not to be forgotten is that the entire stand is actually carved from one solid block of nephrite jade. So the interlocking that you see was made during the process. It was actually one stone which was interlocked there. And the width that you see for the spine of the book is fairly large. So it tells you that it's a copy of the Holy Quran, which was fairly a wide book, which had a very thick spine, which needed to be accommodated in this. And we were really curious to see what is the story of using rehals in this case for the Quran, but also holy books that were represented, be it in the Gurdwara, be it in Hindu temples, how they are used and what are the kinds of accoutrements or props that are needed for creating things of this fashion.
This becomes interesting because, it shows these are two traditions which coexist in India. One is the Islamic tradition, there is the Hindu tradition. Hindu tradition is rich in iconography. Lots of gods with many hands, many heads. So it's really a visual culture. And in contrast, Islam does not like iconography, but like any culture, any religion needs form to communicate thoughts. So it uses geometry, it uses objects, not human forms, not plant forms, not animal forms, but geometry to express itself. And I think that is something that always needs to be highlighted, how the same artist would be making iconography for Hindu patrons and would be making these geometric forms for Muslim patrons. And I think that tells you about the skill of these artists. They understood the needs of their customer, and they could sort of work with different needs and different requirements very comfortably, move from one to the other.
So the next object, the seventh object we are considering, is the Ganga Jali. The Ganga Jali, as the name says, to hold the water from the holy Ganges. Across Indian pilgrimage traditions, if you went up north or if you went to any area, you would bring back Ganga Jal from the Ganges. And when it came back, you would create special receptacles or containers in which they would be kept. By the 19th century, and this particularly is a style when you created objects heavily carved using a mixture of European and Indian style. So the cartouche panels inside which the Indian gods are inscribed, the outer form is very European and the inner form is very Indian. So you see a mixing of things happening here. But the metalsmithies were very, versatile enough to adopt and bring in multiple styles into their creation. What we see on the top, which gets unscrewed as the lid, is of course the head of river Ganga, and it is meant to symbolize Ganga on the top. And there is a name not fully decipherable of the owner or the patron who got this object made. There was a very rich tradition of inscribing names on it. So our essential concern on this was that what kind of stories do Ganga Jali's imports give us, and what was it about these holy waters that was so important that they needed not just to be kept but to be preserved in the most remarkable containers?
So when you look at Ganga in India, is about the banks of the river is where you go to die, and if you put the ashes of the dead in the Ganga river, it is supposed to cause rebirth. So it's associated with rebirth, and rebirth is one of the most foundational ideas of Indian thought. And really, the physical manifestation of rebirth is the Ganga river, and that's an important idea. It was so important, the Ganga river, is that even the Mughal kings during their consecration ceremonies would use Ganga Jal. So it became so important. They realized the importance of Ganga Jal that I think some of the Mughal kings would only drink, if they drank water, they would drink only Ganga Jal. So there were these special, logistics department managing the supply of Ganga to their palaces. And even when they traveled abroad, I'm told that they carried these vast, when the Maharajas would go abroad, I think they were also making a sign that we carry our own water. It's obviously, showing your power and showing how much wealth you have. But it was always Ganga water. So Ganga plays this important role about it's just not a river, it's an idea. It's an idea of rebirth. And this pot is, I think the image on top is obviously Ganga, most probably. But what is interesting is, imagine this being shown to a child. And if you show this pot to a child, you can tell the stories of the Ganga by looking at the images. It's an early comic book. It's like a comic book. It's a graphic novel. That's the image. And there you have Ganesha over there. You have got Shiva in an aniconic form. So without human form. Then there is Shiva in a human form. And then again, there are different human forms. Sometimes he's with his wife and there's the Ganga flowing out of his hair. So that image is there. You have got images of Shiva if you look at him, is with Nandi over there. So the bull. Then there is Bhairav with a dog. So the dog, which is an inauspicious animal associated with crematoriums, is with Shiva. The wild bull is associated with Shiva. You have got the mendicant who wanders in the crematorium associated with Shiva. So the inauspicious Shiva is made auspicious by contact with the Ganga.
So the eighth object we have is the extraordinary Saraswati on the ink pot. Saraswati and her association with knowledge and learning is well known. But here clearly the silversmith also decided that the best god to depict on an ink well, the source of writing, was the goddess of learning. And we essentially wanted Devdutt to give us a sense of what are the different forms in which Saraswati really comes out? How is her story highlighted? Because Lakshmi is a far more prevalent and used goddess. Parvati, because of her association with Shiva, comes in. But Saraswati makes inroads in a very subtle ways across the iconography of objects that we have.
So Saraswati, she holds a lute in her hand, or an iktara, and this is, we forget India is oral tradition, and it's really knowledge was passed orally. Writing comes much later in India and is never given the same importance. Writing was only important to the accountants. Otherwise, writing was not considered important at all. Even the literary space, it is about memory, and therefore the Saraswati is associated with a musical instrument. You sing knowledge. But then, of course, as writing becomes important, the inkpot becomes important. You have, Saraswati is associated with waterfowl, and sometimes it is a crane, sometimes it's a goose. This does not look like a goose. It doesn't look like, it's sort of, you wonder which animal the artist is thinking. One interesting is that, Saraswati is also associated with the peacock. So, and this is really a Jain influence. Some of the oldest Saraswati images come to us from the Jains, and this could also be a Jain image for all we know. It could be a Mahavidya. It may not be Saraswati per se, but it could be a Mahavidya. It could be a Jain image. It could be a Hindu image. The oldest Saraswati image in India comes to us from the Jains. And you have these, the Digambars, who associate Saraswati with the peacock, and the Shwetambars, who associate Saraswati with a swan. And there is, Shruta Panchami and Jnana Panchami, which are festivals of Saraswati in the Jain tradition. So, when I look at this pot, our natural thing is it may be a Hindu pot, Hindu family, but it could be because the Jains were the most successful business traders in those areas, and they would have the money for this kind of an ink pot and to afford this kind of a elaborate ink pot with the goddess over there, and they want a little. I wonder if this was a poet or an accountant. I think most probably accountant.
So the ninth object, in this case, the Jaddanagar, which is actually two pieces which are used by women in South India, particularly Tamil Nadu. One goes on top of the head on the hair, and one falls along with the plait of it, which of course you don't see here. You only see the nagar, the crowning piece. Very often this depicts Krishna, and in this case Krishna dancing over Kalia, and you see the remarkable carving on it. What's really particularly interesting, and the reason we chose this, was that the recessed area of it, if you look into the details, you see brilliant outlines of leaves drawn to give you a sense of foliage, or almost create so one image is of him dancing on Kalia, but the other is to show the trees and the foliage of him doing the Ras Leela, perhaps outside somewhere in a tree, in a woods. So that is really what's remarkable for us. The other thing which was spectacular is that the small bells, the beads, are so tightly glued to or fixed to the pendant that they don't really move. So while they're supposed to give you a jingling action, in this case, they are static, they're not moving. And the concept and the idea of why would you want to bring Krishna and his dance and his Leela and his life into a hair ornament, this was really quite extraordinary and remarkable for us. And it's not this one solitary example. There are many others. We even have it in gold, but usually Krishna seems to be the god who is frequently brought in onto the hair.
I would like to hazard a guess that this is from the Telugu region, the Telugu area, the Andhra regions. It's because Krishna plays a very important role in the Bhagavata poetry, which is Kuchipudi, is really closely related, and also it could be the Alvar traditions. And the idea of, there's no clear Radha over here, which is a very South Indian phenomena where Krishna is worshipped with Gopikas, but not specifically Radha, which is a East Indian and North Indian idea, with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taking it that way. But in the South, you only have Krishna and the Gopikas, and the stories of the Bhagavatam as we know it comes from South India in all probability. But what is one interesting story is, we always talk about bhakti poetry written by men, but one of the few bhakti poets, female, we have Meerabai in Rajasthan, we have got Andal, but there is, Muddapalni was a courtesan in the Tanjore kings or the Mysore kings court, and he was a favorite. And there is this beautiful Radhika Santvanam poetry written in Telugu, which talks about, which is written by a courtesan about Krishna forgetting Radha when he gets a younger wife, and then Radha feeling very sad that Krishna has gone to a younger wife. It's obviously court politics happening. masquerading as Krishna Radha love. And I wonder whether that is the reason the dancers and they were very rich, right? These courtesans were very rich, and they would have afforded these Krishna imagery on their hair. And one of the songs which is written by Mudaparni is that the reason Krishna defeats Kalia the snake is because it claimed that its tail is more beautiful than the plait of Radha. And Krishna wanted to teach a lesson. How dare you say that you're more beautiful than Radha? So I danced on his head and caught hold of his tail and told that your tail is not as beautiful as Radha's plait. So I thought, maybe someone got that idea and decided to put Krishna as the Judamani or the hair ornament of, probably a queen or a courtesan.
The next object is the umluk or the mukut or the crown, which is used largely in Himachal Pradesh, but it's also used in certain regions of Punjab, where on top of the turban, the bridegroom would tie this ceremonial silver piece. This is the example you're seeing has 3 panels, but there are others in the collection which are 5 panels of other formations as well. This one is etched and carved in silver. We have objects which are in enamel and in many other materials as well. What's really remarkable is that all the 3 groups of images that you see are all married couples. There's a male and a female character. So was this to try and signify the union? Was this the reason they were doing it? And literally, was it to have the gods blessing you or putting auspicion into the wedding ceremony that elaborate crowns of this could be used? I have friends who tell me that till about 25 years back, this was fairly popular in North India, but not to be seen now, unless you're in a slightly more rural area.
During the wedding ceremony, the husband becomes a god and the wife becomes a goddess during the ceremony. So it is across India. Now, this is Shiva and Parvati, the domestication of Shiva. So you see his beard, and he's an ascetic who is the hermit who's become a householder. Then there's Raja Ram with Sita on one side, and there is Kali dancing on top of the Shiva, who is like a corpse. So she makes him alive. Shava becomes Shiva with Kali dancing on top of him. So really, a man's masculinity emerges only when the woman enters her life, and that's the idea which is being communicated. A lot of fertility ideas, but also because the gods in India have to marry, and this marriage is what differentiated Hinduism from Buddhism and Jainism. In Buddhism and Jainism, you give up married life to become the monk, and the monk is venerated. In Hindu traditions, the gods marry and only then become divine. It is this dampatya, the transformation of the god into a householder, one half of a pair, which is the central theme of Hinduism that is often missed today, because most of the Hindu leaders seem to be these celibate men who don't realize they're mimicking Buddhist and Jain practices. And the original Hinduism, if I might say, the Puranic Hinduism is about gods getting married, and that this image is interesting. Also interesting is the fact that, these images I've been observing, they come from all parts of India, right? We see the same gods in North India, South India, West India, Central India, whether it is in Telugu regions, Tamil regions, or Himachal, the same gods across the continent. And I think that's quite interesting. The artists are using the same motifs because those are the ideas that are emerging from the land.
So the final object that you see here is a water flask. It's also a ritual flask. Why we call it ritual flask? Because it was possibly used for rituals. The use of the Ganga Jamni materials, that is gold and silver in the bulk and gold as a highlight, also gives us a sense that probably this was a gift from a rich patron or from a royal patron to a sage or an ashram or a religious establishment of their liking, where offerings had to be made, and to proclaim their greatness or the fact that they were rich enough to allow for this kind of gift giving. Elaborate piece of this kind was given. Do remember that many of these pieces were never really used. They would have just been kept as gifts and perhaps seen in the shrine, seen in the ashram. But this was really, what do you really give a sage who has renounced everything? What do you give to somebody who has given up things? So you give them something which is utilitarian in the way it is made, but not really used. And we wanted a sense of why is it important for people to sort of give these kind of gifts to religious establishments?
So this really doesn't have much of, when we were selecting these images, and I was talking to Pramod, many images are objects here. It is, of course, why did they choose a swan? And, that's the question that we'll ask: a waterfowl or a swan or a hans. These are questions to ask, and that's what makes they need not be religious objects. This could have been a secular object. But the fact that in India everything is given some religious significance, such an expensive flask would be given to royalty, and it would have meaning, and a story would have emerged. Otherwise, they would not have used a bird to show, and specifically a hans. So something about hansa connects it with Saraswati, connects it with water, connects it with the goddess. So I think these are ideas that emerge. Of course, we can only speculate on it. One is not sure. This is one of the classic images where there's nothing overtly religious in this art. If you look at the artwork, it's just this could be just for any reason. Not everything has to have a mythological significance, and that's important to keep in mind.
The tradition of using precious material to create artworks is something that really exists in the subcontinent, and we've got examples which go back very much till about the 4th, 5th century. We also have prehistoric material which have been excavated. We also have material from Buddhist shrines which are beautifully carved objects in gold. Unfortunately, many of these pieces are not necessarily in Indian establishments or museums, but we definitely have examples going back to prehistoric times, definitely from the early centuries of the before the Common Era. This tradition seems to have had an unbroken link down to the current Tejas, to the extent that even today, designers, practitioners from across the world, when they want to really make special one-of-a-kind objects, they end up coming to the Indian subcontinent to getting these made. And where else do you go in the world where you can make literally anything that you want? One-of-a-kind, specific pieces that need to be made in precious material. Only India, and that to certain establishments within the country, are where you can really get these made. And the fact that silversmithy as a continued craft exists was important enough for us to then realize that, okay, then this skill needs to be highlighted through the way of a museum or a gallery or an expansive collection which tells you what all forms this material takes, what all crafts are involved in it, what are the kinds of nuanced making skills that come in, and what are the little techniques. Each region has a, if you can see the filigree from what was erstwhile Andhra Pradesh, now Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. If you see the filigree from Odisha, it is slightly different. If you're looking at chain making in Kolhapur, it is different. If you're looking at the tradition of chains out of linking in Rajasthan, it is different. The kind of engraving and enameling and bead making in Gujarat is different. So what is that one place where you can tell the story of these hand skills that continue to exist, and hence the reason and the importance of creating a center to look at this precious skill making tradition and the material, of course, and the historic material. So we've got very old examples at the museum, and it was very important that this be shared and outreached with the larger world. It didn't necessarily mean that it has to remain within a bhandara or a private store. Amrapali was always clear, this is outreach. And may I also comment that over time, across the world, you have several museums, institutions, book publishers, writers who have used objects from the Amrapali collection to explain the story of precious material and silversmithy from India.
One of the things I always tell people that Hinduism spread through stories, and it had these rich stories: Shiva's stories, Ram's stories, Krishna's stories. Stories play a very important role. Iconography is very much part of Hindu traditions, Jain traditions, even Buddhist traditions, which would be used as kind of a nudging parents to tell children about stories. And so storytelling through iconography is something that makes you think that how these stories reach the homes of people, and it is through objects like these.